Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz, Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a fantastic chat featuring three boundary-pushing musicians that turns into a bit of a love fest. It's Daniel Lopatin, better known as Oneohtrix Point Never, along with David Grubbs and Jim O'Rourke, who in the 1990s were known together as Gastr del Sol. Now, Lopatin has created an incredible body of experimental records over the past 20 or so years. His woozy, sample-heavy early material had him pegged as the inventor of vaporwave, but he never stays in the same musical place very long. He broke through to a bigger audience with soundtracks for the Safdie brothers movies Good Time and Uncut Gems, and he's also heavily responsible for the sound of the Weeknd's records, where he's credited as an executive producer. The 10th Oneohtrix Point Never album, called Again, came out late last year, and once again it found Lopatin utilizing a new set of inspirations, one of which was the post-rock movement of the 1990s, which figures heavily into today's conversation. More on that in a minute, but first check out a little bit of Again, the title track from the latest Oneohtrix Point Never album. Now, featured on that track was none other than Jim O'Rourke, an experimental musician and producer perhaps best known to the pop music world for working on Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot and A Ghost is Born. But O'Rourke's CV is far too vast to dive into here, and the focus of this conversation is his 1990s collaboration with fellow musician David Grubbs in a band called Gastr del Sol. That duo burned bright for a few years, amassing a catalog that's difficult to pin down, ranging as it does from arch orchestral pop to more rangy experimental songs. They disbanded in 1998, leaving the world on a high note with their poppiest yet perhaps weirdest set of songs, Camoufleur. Gastr del Sol's legend has only grown in the meantime, and they finally got around to releasing some new old material just this year in the form of a combination live album rarities set called We Have Dozens of Titles. True to their ethos, it's neither a standard odds and ends package or a greatest hits set, but rather combines an excellent live recording of what turned out to be their final concert, and songs that had been previously orphaned on various compilations. Check out a little bit of The Seasons Reverse here, which is referenced in this chat. Now, speaking of this chat, Talkhouse conversations are usually more two-way streets than this one, but it turns out that Daniel Lopatin is a huge Gastr del Sol geek, so he ends up asking most of the questions. He's got deep-seated opinions and interesting theories on their music. They chat about getting into music, about specific passages in Gastr songs, about the idea of indie rock as a genre, and about the time Gastr del Sol was asked to license a song for a tentacle porn movie. Oh, and Daniel calls Gastr del Sol's music trashy. He means it in a good way. Enjoy.
Okay. Well, firstly, congrats on We Have a Dozen Titles.
Oh, thank you.
How are you guys feeling about it being out in the world and doing this? I mean, essentially, this is like your version of a press tour, which is like completely antisocial. There's not going to be a show. There's not going to be anything. Like, fuck you guys. You'll get the rarities and we're out. But you are doing some interviews and some press. I don't want to ask you anything that you guys are already sick of talking about. So if there's anything, what don't you want to talk about? Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I don't know. We'll let you know.
I'm not a journalist, so this is going to be very awkward.
Yeah. But we're going to ask you questions also.
Yeah. Oh, that would be absolutely a nightmare. Thank you so much.
I was going to say, it feels good to have made this one record. And I feel like I've had conversations with a couple of friends in the last few days who've said like, oh, I've got 7 albums, like from my archive that I need to release, and what should I do? And I don't know, that just sounds like a nightmare. The idea of there being like an open-ended reissue program, like as the live recordings, become like worse and worse performances that sound worse and worse. I don't know. I'm just really happy to have this one and done, and that's it. Because we found that, or somebody found the live recording for us from the CBC archive, I felt like we could set a pretty high threshold for, quality of the live material, and the uncollected studio material is what it is, and that's it.
This is like the inverse, antithetical, kind of after the fact, greatest hits kind of let's cash in. We owe the label one more thing, or we need a little re-up or whatever. This is really like, from what I can tell, and we'll talk about the record because I spent quite a bit of time with it, and I want to talk about the music for a change. But to me, it has that feeling of your other records, which it's tight. It's very thoughtful. There's not this like crazy overabundance, like, kind of content for content's sake, which is a thing. It's not 4 CDs worth of stuff. It's a kind of a journey in and of itself, even the way where you begin sort of at the end with this performance. I love this as its own kind of artwork. I don't want to compare it to some sort of like rarities thing because I don't really think it is. But that said, since you guys are fucking musos, what is a good rarities record?
I remember there's one, it's probably a bootleg, but there was a good like live rarities record of Egg that was really, really good. God, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Some people are really into those like nuggets things. I've never heard those things, but that's what comes to mind. Nuggets.
Yeah.
Well, now it's like YouTube is this giant rarities machine or whatever.
Yeah.
I probably sound outdated saying YouTube. I have no idea how people are comprehending this vast library of stuff. But for me, definitely Nuggets on some level I'm a little younger than you, but I'm old now. But I wanted to talk about tape culture and this explosion of sharing music that you guys lived through and was so instrumental in what happened in both of your lives and then kind of coming together. But it's funny that you say that about those Nuggets comps. I had those Rhino Records funk CDs when I had those kind of things.
When David and I were growing up, probably the big sort of rarities compilation records were the Warner's Loss Leader records. You remember those, David?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's like the only place you could get like these rare like Van Dyke Park tracks, like commercials.
Like Icecapades commercial.
Yeah. Those were kind of big for me when I was young. So yeah, I'd actually forgotten about those until just now.
Yeah, I don't know. You were asking like, what's a good rarities record? And I was just sort of thinking the opposite. Like when I first described this record to somebody, I feel like they cut me off in mid-sentence and they were like, oh, the Odds and Sods record. Like super dismissive, like, okay, you're just like emptying out the closet. Yeah. No, and with this one, the organization of it, once we had that final concert recording, then, it kind of became obvious that the album starts with the first song of the concert, it ends with the last song of the concert, and proceeds by way of flashbacks to these studio recordings.
Yeah.
That organizing principle to me is very beautiful.
Thank you.
It's just a touch sentimental, like just a little bit, but not too much.
I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction against things like this that are like organized by default chronologically.
Yeah.
Like in the same way that reading biographies, like I always just feel like, the first 20% of it, like the childhood years, I'm kind of like reading fast through. And then it's so sad because then the person dies at the end.
And it's just not even realistic. It's just not even the way our imaginations work or our memories work. And I could easily tie in any of these moments to things I want to ask you about, like formally or technique about things you guys were doing as a band and ways you were actually going about constantly challenging those norms, even in the music. But we'll get to it. And now I'm going to contradict myself, and then let's just speed run through your depraved little childhoods. Let's just get it. Let's just figure out why the hell you both end up making this colossal and brave but very ultimately challenging decision to be a musician. Because I really don't know about your kind of respective upbringings and how you found yourself. For instance, were you writing poetry and prose from a very young age, Dave, or where did it all sort of begin?
I started taking classical piano lessons when I was 6 and did that for 10 years. I was not a super assiduous, hardworking pianist, but, I'm comfortable at the piano. I started playing guitar when I was 12 because all of a sudden I just had this idea that I needed to be in a band. And keyboards didn't seem like a workable tool for being in a band.
Yes.
And very soon after that, like age 13 or 14, like reading Rolling Stone and having been into Led Zeppelin and stuff like that, all of a sudden I was aware like, oh, wait a second, all of that music is like more than a decade old or more than a decade out of date. And suddenly I'm reading like an interview with Public Image in Rolling Stone. And from there, it's like a quick trip to notice all of the fanzines sitting by the door at the record store in 1980 or 81 in Louisville. And I suddenly realized, like, oh, there are all of these kind of like weird punk bands from Louisville. So at the same time that I was discovering stuff like whatever, The Clash and Devo, I was also discovering that there were, strange bands from Louisville, Kentucky, and they had, made records. And it's weird. Those are the records that I probably listened to more than any other record, like the End Tables 4-song 7-inch, or like the Blinders, single, or things like that, just because, when you didn't have a million records, like when you had dozens of records, you just listened to them over and over and over again. Yeah, so, started playing in bands, played in a new wave band called the Happy Cadavers. Squirrelbait started when I was 15.
Oh, wow. So you're just a kid.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Squirrelbait was done.
Were you a fan? I know you like country music, so you probably like Squirrelbait.
Wait, where'd you get I like country music?
I don't know.
How many false statements are in that one sentence? Yeah.
Welcome to my world, boys.
Yeah.
I didn't know Squirrelbait in real time, no. I knew him later, but I'll let David continue.
Yeah, then, I don't know, like Squirrelbait was on Homestead Records. My connection also, I was a fanzine editor. I did a fanzine called Hit the Trail. It was one like 8.5 by 11 sheet, and then you fold it in half and then cut it in the middle and then insert. And so then it would be like a little 8-page 5.5 by 4.25 magazine, and you stick a first-class stamp on the back of it and put one staple in it and send it. And that's kind of how Squirrelbait wound up on Homestead Records, was that I traded fanzines with Gerard Cosloy and Thurston Moore, and all these people. Met Steve Albini when I was like a junior in high school. I don't know. Then I was in a band called Bastro, and then I was in a band called Gastr del Sol. And here we are.
I have a very random Gerard Cosloy story, but I inherited all of his records by mistake at the town dump. In the town I grew up in, there was a little hut where people leave books and records and tape players and whatever wasn't wanted anymore. And there were these big crates of records one day. It was all the classic stuff that you need when you're like 14 years old. So there was like, Nico and, Transformers in there and Talking Heads and all the staples or whatever that suddenly I had because I found these crates. But then there was these two compilations, and one of them was called The Blasting Concept.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Many years later, I turned it over. I was like, what? How did I get these records? And those two comps always stuck out. And I flipped it over, and it said Gerard Cosloy at the bottom there. And it was probably the beginning of me Google searching stuff or whatever, it was like, or whatever I was searching. I look him up and I go, oh my God, this is the guy that founded Matador that went on to go do, and he grew up in my town. And I wrote the label a letter, and I said, to whom it may concern, I have Gerard's records, and I don't know if he wants them back. And Gerard,
drop $100,000 in a paper bag on the corner.
His parents, yeah, exactly. His parents had just dumped him or something like that, and he was like, "No, keep him." But anyway,
The Blasting Concept, that was an important record.
I would have never heard about that in 100 years.
It's a good tie-in for my origin story. Which,
here we go,
because that's what people call it now. Mm-hmm. So my parents are from Ireland. My mother cleaned houses. My dad dug holes in the street for the gas company. And I wanted a 8mm camera when I was 6, 7, or 8, whatever, for Christmas, because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And instead I got an acoustic guitar because I couldn't afford the 8mm camera. So that's how I became a person who played instruments. Different than David, I kind of immediately was, because I was playing guitar, I was like into like Alan Holdsworth and more jazz things like Abercrombie. But also I got, this
is a gift. This is a gift for you, David, just for the people listening out there on the airwaves. Damn. This is an Alan Holdsworth t-shirt that I'm going to give to Jim.
Oh, wow.
All right.
I never got to see him live. That's another story.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I also was getting into prog rock. But when I got to high school, I was already more into like the weirder side of things. I was like listening like Cecil Taylor and Ornette Coleman. But I had a friend in high school that I did a zine with. Okay, this is where the stories match with David's. And he was totally into, like, his favorite band was the Ramones, but we had bonded over Captain Beefheart. And we started doing this zine called Social Smegma. And the interesting thing is, he was already in touch with Jello Biafra. And if you remember, the Dead Kennedys records would come with booklets filled with collages from, I think the guy's name was Winston Smith.
Yep.
But also from people who had sent Jello collages. And I believe it's Bedtime for Democracy. There's one page in the booklet that my friend who did Social Smegma and I did that got used in the thing. So, but Social Smegma was mostly like things like pretty SST oriented. Like we interviewed Mike Watt, but there was also things like that I was like, it would be like Cecil Taylor and blah, blah, blah. So that's how I got introduced to this other world of underground do-it-yourself music. But the world I was coming from was sort of like underground, you know, electronic music like P16D4 and, you know, H&S and all that stuff. And so I sort of merged those two worlds in my head at that point in high school. And the blasting concept, I remember I was really, really impressed with Saccharine Trust. So that's sort of how those two worlds sort of met for me. But I mostly wanted to make tape music. I was never in bands. I was never in a band before I worked with David, except for wedding bands. I just liked sitting in a room in front of a tape machine.
What was your first sound on sound experience? How old were you when you heard two fucking sounds layered on top of each other?
Pretty young, like 7 or 8, using two like mono tape decks and using the air to go back and forth. No, I was 9 because I read in the liner notes to Zappa's Chic Your Booty, he talked about this technique called Xenocropolis or something like that. And he's talking about how you combine different performances that don't belong together and blah, blah, blah. And I tried to do that. So that really hooked me. Interviews with Zappa and also Pete Townsend that I read when I was young really hooked me on like making things with tape. And then, of course, I found out about tape music, you know. It's kind of cliche, but it was. The first one was the Pierre-Henri, you know, Etude for a Door and a Sigh was the first thing. Because that was really easily available in the States then, because it was on Limelight, and it was at the library. So, yeah, really young.
It's this beautiful serendipitous meeting, and it makes so much sense based on not just kind of all these contingent factors, too, that have to do with the excitement around music on the fringes that suddenly became really discoverable in this primitive but unbelievably mind-blowing way, which was exchanging tapes and zines and all this stuff that was kind of at the heart of a kind of a DIY culture. But suddenly you're listening to stuff that had previously almost been gatekept or something like that. It was academic music and punk music and everything in between sort of enmeshing in this way where suddenly it was like, look, if it's good, it's good. And the academic music was kind of bleeding into everybody's hands.
I feel like I hardly ever even understood music to be academic just because I knew it through recordings. I didn't know it through people teaching it to me or, you know, like as a like contemporary music performer. I mean, Jim had more of a conservatory music school experience, but for me it was all just trying to make sense, like reverse engineer it and make sense of it through the recordings, you know, which were not the ideal forms of it for most of the, you know, composers or artists.
I did have that experience, I don't want to call it training. When I was in college, when there would be time off, you know, the summer vacation, I would go, but I would be in like over in Europe, in Germany, doing stuff. And I'd come back and the main professor would say, well, what did you do on your summer vacation? And I said, well, I was in Europe and I did these shows and there's a record coming out of this thing. And he would just look at me. It's like, maybe you should take a semester off to get these records and concerts out of the way so you can concentrate on your studies and get a teaching position so you have students play your pieces. And that attitude made them my enemy for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it made you sick. Yeah.
And it still is true to a certain, a lot of that kind of music that I loved, you know, Luc Ferrari, Parmigiani, it was stuck in the academic world. And especially like P16D4, was a really big turning point for me, because I realized you can make this music and it doesn't have to exist in this world. This world doesn't, up to that point, it had to exist in that world because that was the only world that could afford to build the studios that could make that music, Yeah. But that wasn't true anymore. Right around my late 80s, that was not true anymore.
Yeah, so not only could you hear this stuff suddenly,
but you could make it.
You could make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It was really like right around 85 to 88. That was really kind of the turning point. It became possible for anybody to make this stuff.
So let's jump up to the first Gastr del Sol record. And I guess this is kind of more directed towards you, David, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jim, you join up on that second record, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I read this really interesting thing about the first one. I think it was a comment you made somewhere about a watery Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
And you were describing kind of feeling almost like uneasy because it marked this shift towards this much more gradually evolving kind of music. And the piece itself was really long.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. And obviously, it's like a beautiful piece of music. And the approach that you take on that piece of music, you expanded on together as a duo and reached all kinds of heights with it, and it influenced so many people, such as myself, to think about arrangements in different ways, instrumental music in different ways, breaking off certain forms, what to keep and what not to keep. But I wanted to ask you about that kind of moment of like fear.
Yeah, no, the moment of fear is an amazing thing. So, in retrospect, it was incredibly fortuitous that Tortoise started when they did and kind of took off when they did. I had played, the last version of Bastro was with John McIntyre and Bundy Brown, who were in the first lineup of Tortoise. And we came back from a tour. I'd taken a semester off of school. Touring at the time was kind of a serious commitment, you'd go for 6 or 7 weeks or something like that. And at the end of this Bastro tour in the fall of 1991, I just remember sitting down with John and him saying I think, it's hard to imagine being able to do this again. Tortoise is taking off and blah, blah, blah. Bundy and I were roommates. We just kept writing music, but it was the first time that I'd played acoustic instruments in a long time, except for, playing the piano. And, it was really possible to do this, disarmament, this, respect your neighbors kind of music, and to get rid of the rehearsal space. It broke the frame of the band, which before that for me had been all about kinds of a band is a unit, and like the hardcore trio, when they're thinking about adding a second guitar player, that's a real commitment. You might talk about that for months, and who might that second guitarist be, and you got to choose wisely because you only get to choose once. But yeah, so I mean, Gastr del Sol really broke the frame of the band for me. It was right around the same time that I met Mayo Thompson and was playing in the Red Crayola also, which had, kind of begun by breaking the frame of the band. I remember asking Mayo at one point, how many members have there been in the Red Crayola, do you think? And he said, there are no members in the Red Crayola. It's a non-membership organization. And I don't know, that, it made it possible to reimagine being in a group. But the fear, I remember listening to the playback of A Watery Kentucky and just being it's so painfully slow. Who could possibly listen to this? What was I thinking? It felt really good. And now to take the instrument out of my hand and listen to the playback of something that had felt like a good take. This is a fucking disaster. What was I thinking? Yeah. Right? And then 6 months later, you listen to it and it's just it moves along at a nice measured clip. It's really weird when your sense of time gets reoriented like that.
David, I'm not saying necessarily you, but why do you think a lot of the people that you knew that were making music, why was everybody getting slower?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my question.
There was only one direction. We had gotten faster before, and we were slowing down. I don't know. I think a lot of people would say getting high. That wasn't my reason for getting slower, but maybe I was playing with a lot more people who were getting high.
Yeah, I guess I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. Bastro was a pretty fast aggro band, but before that, Squirrelbait was a thrash band.
Yeah.
And so we weren't going to speed it up. I guess if you got to move in another direction, then slowing it down was the way to go.
This kind of parlays into my next thing, because Jim, you come into the band and this thing is slowing down. I'm going to continuously kind of come back to it, but not just in terms of tempo or something, but the sort of time dilation aspect, or the drone aspect of formally what's happening in the band that continues to become more and more kind of revelatory as the records. But there's a spaciousness, and it doesn't just become more droney or something, but certainly there's a more and more kind of refined and more painterly kind of development of those things. I know, Jim, for instance, you're really have dedicated a lot of your energy in supporting drone music, and I know you love Kevin Drum like nobody else on the face of the planet. Rafael Toral, Tony and his effect on the band. What is it that drew you in so much, and that you've spent a lifetime really discovering or exploring?
Well, there's sort of like this, holy trinity of three people, which is Feldman, Chelsea, and Roland Kane, which I was insane about from my college years. But there was a quote from Feldman that really, it was a story about Feldman that really kind of struck me. At Darmstadt, or one of those really high-minded things, Stockhausen heard a piece of early graphic score piece of Feldman's, and he was, Stockhausen was kind of in the middle of his moment form phase, which that's a whole hour talk in itself. And he asked Feldman, he's like, how do you do it? How do you do this? And Feldman just told him, I don't push the sounds around.
Yeah.
And Stockhausen replied, not even a little bit? And which sort of just in those two tiny sentences, there's such depth in how you think about music, what it means, not just about music, but what your stance is in life politically.
Yes.
And the implications. And that stuck with me. That doesn't mean that's all my interest in music, but that was a key that really set me on the path. Just that simple sort of reading that thing. It might have been in the Nyman book. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Nyman book was a big deal also, but that's what set me on that path and made me understand space in music and time in music.
The Nyman book is that modes of experimental music, or
experimental music, Cage and Beyond, which is absolutely essential.
For me, it was really just about for the first time experiencing that music was a place where your mind could be free to drill in on what's happening sonically, or to be someplace completely other and, come back whenever you felt like coming back. I remember, lying on the floor and wondering what the hell we'd done with A Watery Kentucky. The first time playing 10 Years Alive on the Infinite Plane with Jim and Tony in Jim's apartment was a similar kind of experience for me, where I was playing the long-stringed instrument. So Jim is playing this pulse, 60 beats per minute, and the center pitch of the long-stringed instrument, which is just it's a plank of wood it's a monochord, right? A two-string monochord with guitar pickups on either side. And I'm doing upward moving glissandi, and Tony's I think that there were two ideas for that instrument. One is that you're moving towards the center pitch, which is what the bass is pulsing on, but you never arrive there. It's just so simple and such an amazing idea. Just move towards that pitch, but never arrive there. Never be in unison with the pulse. And the piece is 90 minutes long. In the second half, you can do downward moving glissandi, but Tony was it was kind of like a comedy routine, if you're ready, and you may not ever be ready, and it's a big decision, to change direction. And every time we did it, it was only in the last 10 or 15 minutes of the piece that I felt good about moving from upward glissandi to downward glissandi. But that was for me the kind of paradigmatic experience of my mind was free, I could focus on the micro details of the glisses, or no one was controlling my mind, and certainly the music wasn't.
Yeah, exactly. And then I can't help but skip ahead now to Camoufleur, and it's funny because there's that live version of Blues subtitled No Sense of Wonder on the new record, an instrumental version, right?
Yeah.
And it has a few other interesting sort of alterations that were made for the live one. But it's funny to hear you talk about this kind of procedure you were doing with the glissandis, because my favorite part of that song on the record version is sort of out of nowhere, like total non sequitur, you get these beautiful bends.
Yeah.
And for the first time ever, like, I don't know who's shredding on organ or what's going on, but there's like a pentatonic shred.
If it's pentatonic, it's probably me.
It's you. It's you, motherfucker. I knew it.
Which song are we talking about?
Blue subtitle, No Sense of Wonder, like the original studio version.
Oh, the organ on That's Me, yeah. And I remember recorded it at Solid Sound.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's so sort of like an outlier amongst all these amazing outliers throughout your discography. But it's one of my favorite moments ever because it's such a unique interruption. But it contains all the stuff we're talking about. It has that piece of music has all the freedom you're talking about. But then it has a certain kind of theatrical flair that is also what you guys are like, and what makes the music highly enjoyable and interesting is that tension. Even like I was thinking about it the other day, and I was like, this music is so funny. If I played it for my 73-year-old mother, she might be frightened. Right. But I
was going to say, I remember the reason why I wanted to put that, because I thought it was funny because I knew it was going to get cut off by that. That like telephone sound, that.
Yeah.
This guy's like, I'm on my way. I'm on my way home.
It's really wonderful. It's the band sense of humor, and it's that whole thing I'm talking about. This kind of like the 90s have this rap for like eclecticism. It was kind of packaged a lot, and it was a marketing term in the 90s. Me growing up, I was like a victim of it because I was in middle school, and suddenly you're getting all this kind of information from the world and music marketing and all this stuff. But the thing is, there's certain aspects. I wouldn't call it eclecticism. I'd call it alchemy. There's an alchemical thing happening in the group where this is why I was talking about this sort of like the history of sharing tapes and bringing sort of the academic music down to your home
street level.
Yeah, street
home
level.
turf.
Your Porta Studio 424 or whatever. It's all almost kind of like there's this dense kind of microcosm of all that stuff happening in so many of your pieces. It's so wonderful and speaks to how funny and how free the stuff is. I don't find it drab. I don't find it melancholy. I find it very beautiful. And when people talk a little bit about the slowness of like, say, like a codeine or something like that, or how it's kind of related to shoegaze in certain ways stylistically, there's this introversion and this depression, but I don't hear that in Gastr del Sol at all. I hear this kind of very playful way of calming things down and going inward. And it's very expansive and beautiful. So I love that record, and I'm just thanking you guys for it.
Oh, Thank you. You had me on the edge of my seat with your read of it. No, seriously. Like, I don't know, outgoing and forward-facing and, weird and funny. Yeah.
It's doing all this crazy stuff,
It's probably because it wasn't a band. It was two people making things together.
Yeah.
I mean, band dynamics make different music.
But even this idea of kind of like, Dave, you're talking about forced cohesion or something like there are certain things that almost seemingly carry you through all the way to the edges of Gastr del Sol, where it's like, whatever I got structurally, whatever is going on, no matter how sort of obtuse it may seem, I'm going to find a way to deliver like a sort of cogent vocal melody or a rhythmic, a sort of a pentameter of some kind is going to emerge from these sort of dislocated structures. So this is what I mean. It's constantly like this beautiful battle of like the things that make music really fun and normal and trashy and great and kind of over-determined or whatever in a good way. And the things that make us feel so good sort of from the inside out, the freedom that you guys were seeking, it's all at play all at once.
I mean, I'm really happy to hear you use the word trashy. This is like setting my brain moving now. Yeah, because I don't think that ever once I've ever heard anybody refer to Gastr del Sol as trashy, but I'm here to like understand that. Yeah.
Well, it's not. It's trashy in the sense that it's almost like formally there's a sort of, or like as a formal abstraction of trashiness. It's like there seems to be a playful kind of messiness at times that is happening that's so wonderful, and also like the dryness of things. Like I love that I love that there's not this kind of like over reliance on effects.
If I could have afforded them, there probably would have.
Yeah. We tried.
Well, you were dubbing stuff out, and you guys were getting pretty dubby with your snares.
Man, I have to say, like, from being in the room, watching Jim do the final mix of the Seasons Reverse was fucking insane. It wasn't like Jim had been, like, doing live dub mixes every Friday and Saturday night for 3 years, like, in preparation for that. Like, I just remember John had, everything's sort of, like, recorded out of order. Like, it probably began with the click track and the acoustic guitar part. And I remember just in the final mix, Jim just being like, oh, yeah, I'll do, like, this dub thing. And just, like, whack! Like, all this, the snare drums. And just, like, doing it as a fucking live dub mix, like, while, rolling the final mix of it. And I was just like, how the hell do you know how to do this? I mean, it's sort of like the story of working with Jim. It's like, how the hell do you know how to do that? But, like, his live dub mix for the final mix of the Seasons Reverse was really kind of one of the most insane things I've ever seen Jim do in real time. And I've seen Jim do a lot of insane things in real time. I don't know, Jim, does that even ring a bell? You were so incredibly nonchalant about that.
I remember that. There wasn't any click track, but the drums were actually put into an EMU sampler. Mm-hmm. It's basically just one sample, and it had a filter on it. And because there was no click track, I made the drum track by playing the keyboard and following your guitar part.
Oh, damn.
Like
that rings a bell. I had forgotten that, yes.
But Camoufleur was the only record that I had a computer for. And I was using this software called Deck 2. Mm-hmm. And so it was a combination of my 8-track and the computer. And the crazy thing is there was no sound card. There was no way to sync up the 8-track with the computer. And the sound in and sound out for the Deck program was the headphone jack. So the final master of Camoufleur came out of the headphone jack of my Mac G, whatever, 3, G2, G3, whatever it was. I have no idea how that thing didn't sound like garbage.
Yeah. No, a friend who's a high-end audio consultant in Manhattan, a couple of months ago when the box set was about to come out, said, I just listened to Camoufleur on this amazing system, and it just sounds so incredible. I was like, all right, yeah. I like the music very much. I don't know. I feel like maybe I've never listened to Camoufleur on an amazing system before.
It's that mix, baby. Jim, weren't you saying that you kind of were like, hey, I regret doing all that stereo widening?
I was obsessed with dynamic range because
dynamic range.
Because I had gotten this portable DAT recorder. And also because there was a lot of music that I was really interested in at that time. And also the tape music I was making at that time by myself was becoming extreme. I think that's around making Sen and Scanned. And I was really into Bernhard Günther. And I got really deep into the dynamic range. So that had to be fixed for this box set.
And all the grunge guys are redlining everything, and everything's loud.
I probably didn't even know about it. I don't know anything about popular culture. Like after 1998 or something, I probably don't know anything.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever discuss hey, clarinet, no, but bass clarinet, yes. What were the acceptable instruments for Gastr del Sol, and which ones were off fucking limits? What didn't you want to hear?
I can't think of anything off the bat that was off limits. It sort of began with who is the player? Are they available tomorrow? Right? Yeah. It's really can Vandermark play clarinet? Yeah, that makes sense rather than him playing whatever, tenor sax on Black Horse.
You made the clarinet sound absolutely beautiful. I hate that instrument with a passion for some reason. I don't know why. I think I immediately think of Woody Allen and his band. Yeah. But you guys made it sound so good.
Yeah, but when my son switched from clarinet to bass clarinet, it was
yes. Yeah. No, I think that's a critical...
Yeah, dodge that bullet, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great, small but important alteration.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really down to the people we knew.
Yeah.
And what they played. I can't think of like maybe more than once that we used someone who wasn't like someone we played with a lot.
I want to pivot to lyrics for a second, and I'm not going to claim to know what is going on in your beautiful mind, David. I love your books. I love the mystery of your lyrics, and I would prefer to keep them that way. But I'm going to read you back some of your lyrics, and I want free association. I don't care about what they mean or where they came from. I'm just going to say them, and then both of you guys, whether you like it or not, you just got to tell me what goes through your mind. If it's historical, that's great. If it's what they're about, that's fine. But really, I'm just interested in seeing what emerges on the fly. So, from Work from Smoke, 2 lines. 2 dogs approach, they make work from smoke.
Yeah, that was in a subway station in Munich.
Jim.
Oh,
First thing.
David once told me that it was in a train station in Munich.
Perfect. This is going great. 8 Corners off of Mirror Repair, which I love Mirror Repair. 8 Corners, Western Avenue, Taylorsville Road, Blackstone, Armand Avenue, North Avenue. I can go on, but you know the rest of it.
Yeah, Ethan Buckler from King Kong, who's from Louisville and also played in Slint, lived in Chicago for a while, and he was haunted by the fact that the streets go on forever in Chicago. So I imagined streets extending from Chicago to Louisville. Yeah. So I think in 8 Corners, it would be like 7 Chicago streets and then 1 Louisville street. So Taylorsville Road, Longest Avenue, those are all streets in Louisville.
Awesome.
I always really love the cadence on that one. When it gets to the last of each group, it just seems inevitable, even though I don't know what it is, really. But they always seemed inevitable. I always really liked what David did on that one.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, we got one more. From the Relay on Upgrade and Afterlife. Cooked corn in formaldehyde, popcorn in an airtight jar, cornflakes under glass.
It's a description of a display case at the, it's like the Anthropology Museum in Paris. I mean, so much of this is just like descriptions of objects or descriptions of images. My mother was a photographer, and I, spent a lot of time with her in the darkroom when I was a kid. And so, yeah, just like describing photographs, that's sort of like my go-to for writing most anything.
Love it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I was laughing because at one point, although David doesn't remember this, we got approached by an animation company in Japan they wanted to use a track in this Japanese animation film. And so I got a VHS cassette of it. And at the time, it was when I was living with Kevin Drum. And so I said, hey, Kevin, I got this video from, they want to use a Gastr song. We start watching it. And it's like one of those tentacle porn, like where the octopus has sex with busty women.
Yeah.
We're just watching that. And all of a sudden, Kevin goes, cornflakes. So unfortunately, that will always be my memory of that lyric. It's some mosaic tentacle porn.
Incredible.
Sorry about that, David.
No, it's good. It's good.
Look, it is what it is. I asked, and I shall receive.
It happened.
Okay, enough waxing poetic about the past. You have this new release, and we have to continue waxing poetic about the past, I just realized. I can't even break away from it. I have some silly fan questions, but are those gunshots at the end of Seasons Reverse, or is it something else? Like during the recording of the conversation with the kid, the French kid.
They're firecrackers.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. It's so like phenomenologically fucked in my sort of experience of it, because I always thought it was like, okay, this is 2 separate sources collaged, but just 2. And it's really weird. It's really weird that there's gunshots that just, it makes me think, like Dick Cheney blew off some guy's limb or whatever. That was the image that it was somehow always evoked for me, was this weird, just like, like some hunters, like some real bad, some really bad kind of people. And then this sort of...
those kids might have grown up to be bad people.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know. But then this kind of beautifully banal conversation happening, the gunshots. But now I understand. My dream is shattered, but it's all right. Album opens. We talked about it, but the album opens with the first song from the final concert. Can you describe the mood of that last gig? Was it a sense of finality or just another gig?
I don't think we knew at that point.
Yeah.
Because the record wasn't done yet. But that was at this festival called Victoriaville, which was in Canada. And it was, at that time, it was one of the few European-style festivals in North America. I mean, now you've got these kind of things all over the place. When I say European style, I mean like funded, jazz-centric, slightly outside music, but large festival, which historically had been a lot of in Europe, and we had played at in Europe. And it was a weird combination of people. It was the first year, I think, that the festival had bands, because I had played at it before, like with who did I play with? Gunter Mueller, blah, 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 blah. It's a strange festival, because it's, like I said, it's like Europe in North America. I believe Tortoise played that year as well. Is that right, John?
Yeah, I think so.
John was there. And our setup was, I don't remember, did you play guitar for the whole concert?
Yeah, I might have played piano on one thing, but I think almost exclusively guitar.
And I think at that time I was not playing guitar so much during the sets because especially the Camoufleur stuff, I didn't play guitar a lot on that record, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you were playing piano and organ and
I had a
bringing in
Farfisa,
tape material.
And then I had like some like CD, like the little mini CD players, and my first laptop, which was a 520C. We'd only done a handful of shows with that kind of setup. So we were still sort of working out how to do those live, because it was the first time where we had backing material that we played to. Because the Seasons Reverse, the bass and the drums are actually coming out of the laptop.
And there's like a brass section or horns on the album version.
Rob Mazurek plays cornet.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you were writing for the album, but already performing some of the pieces and kind of poking and prodding at them a little bit. But you had a record to make, so it wasn't time. There wasn't a sense of like, hey, this might be the last gig.
No. I didn't feel that.
I think we had we had only done like the basic tracks of the record up to that point. Like I think David was still in the process of writing lyrics. I think on that record, for certain more so than other records, there were some overdubs that required going to other studios. So like I would go out to Solid Sound and record the Hammond part and things like that. So it was, the basics were all done in my little studio room, but that's where we were when we did that show.
And generally at that point in the history of the group, is there like, hey, we're going to go off and write sort of the core concept of the song as a sort of a song form or whatever, as a motif or whatever is going to happen independently? It's stuff that you guys work out and then bring to one another and then work out and build out together?
It's probably a mix.
I mean, almost everything that we worked on really began as a composition, as a kind of skeletal composition, whether it's one guitar or two guitars or a piano part, and then the arrangement gets built in the studio. Yeah, at the time, I remember people asking us for things for compilations, assuming that, it was like Can or whatever, that we just had like dozens and dozens of hours of this garbage. And it's like, no. We, this is all there is. Yeah. But each thing really would begin with a composition. And even though, Jim was like a fabulous improviser, and improvisation sort of like loomed large in the way that we thought about music.
I love Quietly Approaching. I really love it. It's a never before heard one, right?
It was on a compilation.
Oh, it was on a comp.
I think it was on the Red Hot and Bothered compilation.
Okay, my apologies.
Yeah,
no.
It was on a major label.
Yeah.
It was on Reprise Records.
We were on a lot of major labels for like doing tiny little
weird music.
Well, here's my next question, actually, because it seems like that was possible then, and we can
for a brief moment.
For a brief moment, and we're in a different place now, and we don't have to litigate all of that. But I am curious, kind of from the perspective of a project that did so much work during this like really sort of a prosperous time for indie rock. What was your impression of even that concept, the idea of indie rock at the time, having like Dave, you went through punk, you went through hardcore, you went through every iteration of, trying to break away from all that stuff. And then, how do we work with it? How do we individuate ourselves within that matrix or whatever? There's indie rock then and indie rock now. Do you remember how you felt about that as a sort of schematized thing for surviving? And what do you think now?
I mean, I didn't think it so much in terms of musical genre. I thought it much more in terms of labels or venues or things like that. And Drag City seemed like sufficiently, I don't know, musically and in terms of personalities, diversified that it was fine. We weren't on a label of other bands that sounded like us. And venues in Chicago were open to, like a great range of stuff. There was an article about, it was either about Drag City or about like several labels sort of on par with Drag City in Spin magazine right around the time that Drag City put out the first Gastr del Sol record on Drag City. And Dan Koretsky says something like, like talking about offers from major labels to buy Drag City and have them run it. And, Dan was like, what in the world would I do if I weren't running Drag City Records? And this is like in 1992. And I think that he feels the same way in 2024. So I don't know, it's interesting. Indie rock never chafed. It never irritated me as a label. It seemed like a description of record labels that weren't in partnerships with majors rather than, sounding like Pavement or, something like that.
Oh, that's exactly it. It's a kind of just a sort of like an economic framework for bands to sort of give themselves a shot at not having to be over-reliant on those other channels. But in that period of time when you guys were working together, there was some sympathetic thing happening, and it could be that it is now in some ways that I don't fully understand. I don't claim to be a music business expert or anything, but it's funny how it sort of morphed into a kind of a weird kind of taste distinction or something like that. That's the cognitive dissonance. People are just going to describe a certain kind of music as it, and I just get so profoundly confused.
Yeah, no, never really made much sense as a descriptor to me. But it was also never really applied to us. So much.
Yeah, and this sort of sneaky, sticky concept of post-rock and Chicago and this sort of mythology of this kind of Chicago sound.
Basically, the core root of that dissonance is English music writers.
Yes.
Of the time. I wanted to add what David said is in Chicago, it was particularly politicized. The way the writers saw that and the way that it felt on the ground was two different things. But Chicago sort of was a sort of like testing ground for this, which side of the fence are you on? There was a lot of feeling of that in Chicago at the time because there were people who decided they were on this side of the fence and there were people who decided they were on this side of the fence. And we all were running into each other in various ways and playing at the same clubs. And I wasn't coming from that world, so I like really looked at it from kind of outsider's perspective. I mean, in my mind, Drag City wasn't with the way the word was being used then, the alternative press NME sort of way, alternative music, independent music. Yeah. I thought of Drag City as DIY.
The only thing from a suburban Boston kid's point of view, hearing the music for the first time in the late 90s, early 2000s, that I can actually maybe a little bit latch onto as a stylistic regional thing. But I wouldn't say it's Chicago. I'd say it's the Midwest in a way, but there's also links to independent music coming from the South. It's that combination of a strum and a flam, that sort of particular arpeggiation, that sort of...
If people had only called it strum and flam, then, I could have agreed to it.
I mean, there were some parallels between groups and certain kind. I was on Rate Your Music, and at some point, actually, Jim, probably around the same time we were first talking, and we were talking about my record, and I was kind of fixated on this idea that this new generation of music fans were actually doing the sort of detective work and kind of siphoning out different aspects of this time period. And there's this particular sort of almost like a subgenre of post-rock to them. I'm not claiming it's real, but they call it crescendo core. And you knew the bands that were, we could list them, but you guys were definitely not one of them, and that's a particular
decrescendo
formal
core. Yeah.
Yeah, you were decrescendo core. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, actually, with The Water in Kentucky, but it's almost this kind of, it's almost as if the band ends the same way it began, with this kind of like, hey, you know what? We don't have to, when the drums come in, they don't really have to boom. They're going to come in and it's going to be disorienting after 7-8 minutes or whatever, but it's not what you think this is. And this idea of these endlessly repeating codas, there are certain milestones that I would say you guys pioneered that influence people whether they know it or not. And certainly the idea of I only write codas, right? That's my whole problem. that's my whole problem as a songwriter. That's why they'll never fully accept me. But where do you think I got that? That's how it works.
Unfortunately, we only had 5 or 6 codas, not a dozen.
But they were attached to these shriveled, attenuated songs, right? So they just felt like they were all coda.
I have only the most random questions left. Young Nathan wants to know, this is my lovely engineer, if either of you went to Lounge Act's karaoke night.
I co-ran it. It was, no, seriously, not every night. It was run by Fred Armisen and his then wife, Sally
Timms.
Sally Timms.
Yeah.
And if I was free, I co-hosted with Fred. But it was run by Fred Armisen, yeah.
Amazing. Dave, what do you got going? You just had a record come out with a duo record, right?
With Lauren Connors, comes
That's
out
right.
in August. 2 new bands. You're hearing about them here first, maybe. I don't know. Bitter Viper, which is me, Taka Unami, Sarah Hennies, and Nikos Veliotis.
Yes.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Just made a record that'll come out sometime next year. And Squanderers, which is me, Wendy Eisenberg, and Kramer.
What a name.
Kramer
Kramer
suggested it. It's from The Voice in the Headphones, right? The filmmaker is like baiting the person who's working on the film soundtrack and saying like you'll never see the inside of Studio A, like it's only Studio B for you, Squanderer.
Right.
And where that comes from, the first time that I heard Big Star, when I was a teenager, it was the PVC reissue of Big Star's Third, and it has these incredibly nasty liner notes that I feel like they must be by Grill Marcus, maybe Tom Carson, somebody like that. But the whole point of it is the only person who perhaps has squandered their talent worse than Alex Chilton has squandered his would be Rod Stewart. And I was always just thought like, man, fucking Alex Chilton. I'm sure he didn't even get paid for that reissue, but it's just like, and then you pick it up and you the liner notes are like, this person just squandered it all. Like they were so talented, and
that is the saddest documentary. That, by the way, that Big Star that crushed me
on Big Star.
Yeah, it goes through all 4 records pretty much, and
I have to see that.
Sort of the dissolution of the band and the spirit of the band as they progressed.
Yep.
So Squanderers.
Yeah, that's
Dave,
where squandering comes from.
That's amazing. Beautiful. Well, look, guys, this is all I got.
All right, we'll have to reunite to interview you when you make your next record.
I would be blushing. I would be so shy.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my interview notes, but I'll save those for next time.
All right. Well, this was really about this fantastic new record of yours and an opportunity to thank you guys, not just for this, new material, but the entire body of work that you guys created. It's a nice moment to take stock, I think, and we're, as fans, we really appreciate it. So
thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been an awesome time talking with you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Daniel Lopatin, Jim O'Rourke, and David Grubbs for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform, and check out all the great stuff at talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.